All right, so we're talking about the fact that everything the left touches goes bad. Everything they touch goes bad, and then they can't figure out why. And there was such a beautiful example of this in the New Yorker magazine, and it's one that's very dear to my heart. A subject that's very dear to my heart. Been a lot of talk about this. This is a massively long article, and I read every word of this piece. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the New Yorker, but the stories in it just go on forever. They're like book-length stories. It's called "The End of the English Major. Enrollment in the humanities is in free fall at colleges around the country. What happened? What happened?" So I read every word of this. It took me, I think, about 7.5 weeks. I could have told them at the beginning. The left took over the humanities. The humanities turned to crap. But they were just like, what happened? What happened? Before we get to the article, I want to start with a personal reminiscence. And this was in my memoir, The Great Good Thing. I was a lousy student, and I didn't pay attention. I was a renegade. I was a rebel. I didn't want to have anything to do with it. I got my education after I got out of college, when I read all the books that I had bought in college. It took me 10, 15 years, really, to get an education that way, which I should have been able to get in college, but I didn't, and it was my fault. I'm not blaming anybody about it. But while I was there, the left was starting its takeover of the institutions. This is the 1970s, so they're really just beginning to come in, and you would kind of hear them. It was kind of like that scene at the end of the movie Cabaret, where you look around and there's just a few more Nazis in the audience than there used to be. That's what it was like at university. They started with the moral relativism, the racism stuff, all of this stuff was just coming in. Now, I took a course in Victorian poetry, I believe it was in. And the lady who taught this course is now a very big deal. All right, I'm not going to tell her name because it's not really her fault, but it was indicative of something that was happening. At the time, she was just an English teacher. She was teaching poetry. And she was teaching one of my favorite poems, a poem I already knew because in those days, everybody knew it, The Charge of the Light Brigade. Now, this is by Alfred Lord Tennyson, one of the greatest top-tier poets. The top tier is what happens right after Shakespeare. Shakespeare is above it, and then comes the top-tier poets. And Tennyson is out of favor because he represents the Victorian, imperial Britain, but he was one of the greatest poets who ever lived. And this is one of his greatest poems, The Charge of the Light Brigade, which is about a charge in 1854 in the Crimean War. The Light Brigade, because some orders got screwed up, was sent to charge full frontal into a line of guns, of cannons, right? And they were just blown away, and people watching them from above saw they were so disciplined that as each one of them was blown away, they would just close ranks and keep going, and they actually charged through the guns. It was one of the great tragedies, one of the great screw-ups in military history, but it was also one of the great acts of nobility. And in this brilliant, brilliant poem, Tennyson manages to capture both the glory of it and the stupidity of it, just the kind of, there's a line in it, someone had blundered, but at the same time, you understand the incredible courage of these men, but you understand also that they are being sent to their deaths for no reason. And so we're reading this brilliant, brilliant poem, and this girl stands up in the class, a student stands up and says to this lady, who would later become a very, very big deal in the English game, says, "Why are we learning this poem? It's pro-war. Why are we talking? Why do we like this poem? It's pro-war. It glorifies war." And the teacher could not answer the question. She shrugged. She literally just, I don't know. I don't know. And she didn't know. She didn't know why we were learning it. She was an English teacher, and as I said, became one of the leading lights in this field, and could not answer why we were reading Charge of the Light Brigade, one of the greatest poems in the English language. She couldn't answer it. She didn't know. So I was so upset that I leapt to my feet, and I couldn't talk. I was completely inarticulate. I just babbled for a few minutes, and I kept saying, the poem goes half a league, half a league, half a league onward, all in the valley of death rode the 600. You've maybe heard the famous line, "There's not a reason why, there's but to do or die." And so it's like this beautiful poem. I was saying half a league, half a league, half a league onward, so you can hear the horse's hooves. I was trying to explain, and I couldn't. I finally just flopped back into my chair, completely inarticulate, made a complete fool of myself, because if you couldn't hear why that the poem was great, then you shouldn't be learning about poetry in the first place, because you're an idiot. And the thing is, this was an ignorant child, because all children are ignorant. That's what being a child is about. You come to college to be taught. She wanted to hear her own ideas talked back to her because she was a child, because that's what children want. They want to be reassured that everything they think is true, and you have to break it to them as a college professor. Yes, but this is a brilliant poem bringing an amazing moment to life with incredible talent. And it doesn't matter what you think about war. This is an experience in itself. You can still hate war. You can still think that war can be, you can think any stupid thing you want, but at least have this experience with another mind speaking to you out of the past. It's like a time machine. This is why, I mean, these guys are editing Roald Dahl. This is why they're editing James Bond, and eventually they'll edit Shakespeare too. They're just starting with these guys because they can say, oh, it's not important. It's just Roald Dahl. It's just James Bond. But they'll get to Shakespeare. Believe me, they want to silence the voice of the writer so their voice is the only voice around. Don't give us objectivity, just give us reality. And we know what reality is. It's the same thing, right? So the question then becomes, why study literature if it's just going to tell us the same things we already know? Because if it doesn't tell us the same things we already know, we're going to silence it and re-edit it, right? So they can't figure out why nobody's taking English classes anymore, because you don't get anything from English classes. You just get the left telling you what you already know because you read it, because you were taught it in high school. So the article begins in the New Yorker. This is the article in the New Yorker about whither went the English, why did the English department turn to crap? Can't imagine, cannot figure it out. The crisis, when it came, arrived so quickly that its scale was hard to recognize at first. They're always surprised. Everything they touch turns to crap, and they're always surprised when it happens. From 2012 to the start of the pandemic, the number of English majors on campus at Arizona State University fell from 953 to 578. According to Robert Townsend, the co-director of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences Humanities Indicators Project, which collects data uniformly but not always identically to internal enrollment figures, from 2012 to 2020, the number of graduated humanities majors at Ohio State's main campus fell by 46%. Tufts lost nearly 50% of its humanities majors. Boston University, 42%. Notre Dame ended up with half as many as it started with. SUNY, just on and on. People are abandoning these things, right? Now, the thing is, some of the people, they go around asking people, why is this happening? Why is this happening? And nobody says because the left got hold of it and everything the left touches turns to crap. Nobody said that, strangely enough. Well, I'll get back to one person who said one interesting thing, but nobody really came up with the big answer. But somebody said, well, it's impractical. Somebody always wants you to do STEM. They want you, but being an English major was always impractical. When I was an English major, we called it pre-short order chef. That's what we called it because we thought, like you're in pre-med or you're pre-law or something like that. We were pre-short order chef because there was no reason to take it. But even as a bad student, I learned stuff filtered into my mind. Now, I was at UC Berkeley, had the second best English department in the country. There was Yale and UCB. So I was getting great professors. And even though I was a dope, and even though I didn't show up for things, and even though I was drinking and chasing girls, doing all the stuff that you'd think I was doing, I was, I got something. I learned, for instance, that the Greeks came before the Romans, and the Romans came before the Europeans, and the Europeans came before us. That's an important thing. You start to see, there was an idea working itself out over thousands of years in great literature. I realized that the West is unique in its ability to self-reflect, that only the West's artists can win say the Trojan War, and then they can defeat the Trojans. The Greeks can defeat the Trojans, and then the Greeks write plays about how badly the Trojans were treated. I mean, that's only in the West. You think about the Middle Ages, and you think, back then everybody was pious and holy, and the church was in charge. And then you read Chaucer, and it's filled with sex. People are constantly writing to me, why is there so much sex in your books? It's not like the good old days. They should read some Chaucer. If you can get a translation and get it in modern English instead of Middle English, as girls sticking their butts out the window because guy wants a kiss and it's too dark for him to know, and then like farting in his face. I mean, it's like amazing stuff that is going on in the depths of the Middle Ages in the 13th century. And then, of course, there's Shakespeare, who in some way invented who we are. That is, he put on paper what it means to be a man and a woman in a Christian world. People say he's a secular artist. That's not true. It's just that his Christianity is so deep, it just permeates the world, and people don't have to talk about it all the time because it's just the way the world works. So you can break the moral web, you can bend the moral web, but the moral web snaps back in Shakespeare all the time. If you kill your way to the top of the throne, the ghosts of the people you kill are going to come back and haunt your conscience, and your life is going to become meaningless. It's a realistic portrayal of life. Now, you don't have to agree with Shakespeare. You can think, no, I don't want to live that way. You can think, no, there's a better way to live. You don't have to agree with any of these guys, but visionaries are speaking to you from the past. It's as if people had come to you in a time machine and said, this is what it's like. And they're genius people. They're not your professors who are second-rate people. They are genius people with vision and talent that comes from God. They're being spoken to by the muses from God. This is what Shakespeare is doing. He's channeling stuff. He's not just thinking it up by himself. You know, the Folger Shakespeare Library, one of the greatest Shakespeare libraries in the world, what are they teaching over there? Go look at their website. Exploring Race and Whiteness in Shakespeare. Now, the funny thing about that, Shakespeare says a lot of things about race. He has a lot to say about race. If you want to read a great article about it, go to City Journal and look up A Nation of Iagos. Absolutely brilliant article by one of our great, that's by me, I'm joking, but it is still a good article about what Shakespeare has to say about race, A Nation of Iagos. But he's not talking with CRT. If you're talking CRT, critical race theory, you're not talking Shakespeare, you're talking you. He said it had a lot to say about gender, but if you're talking feminist theory or queer theory or critical race theory, you're obscuring the voice of the author. And so when a kid says to you, why should I learn this when I'm just learning you? I'm not learning genius, I'm not getting a visit from the past. This article goes on forever. Let me read some of the reasons people give the writer about why this is happening. Technology. It's technology. It's changed me. I probably read 5 novels a month until the 2000s. If I read 1 a month now, it's a lot. Over the New York Times, Ross Douthat said the same thing. He no longer reads great books. I read great books all the time. I use technology, but I read great old books all the time. Another one says, young people are very, very concerned about the ethics of representation, of cultural interaction. You think that just popped into their heads? This is what they say. She says, several teachers described young people as having an orientation toward the present to the extent that many students lost their bearings in the past. The last time I taught, says one teacher, the last time I taught the Scarlet Letter, I discovered that my students were really struggling to understand the sentences as sentences, like having trouble identifying the subject and the verb. Their capacities are different, and the 19th century is a long time ago. It's not the 19th century being a long time ago, it's you. Who the hell taught them in high school? You did, just the high school version of you. It's leftists who've taken over our education department, so these kids are ignorant. That's the problem. The problem is not they're oriented toward the present. It's that nobody's taught them about the past. It's your fault. That's why this is happening. One teacher said, there's a real misunderstanding that you can come in and say, I want to read post-colonial texts. That's the thing I want to study. And his answer is that all the big writers you want to study, the black writers and the Indian writers and the writers from other cultures, they all read Dickens. And she says, one of the tragedies of the British Empire is that all those writers read all the British books. Terrible tragedy. Guess what? The British wrote better than anyone. They were better at writing. Their books are better. Their language is better. Their insights are better. I've read all the Europeans. I've read a lot of people from other places. The British and the period in the 18th and 19th century wrote better than anyone had ever written before. Oh, I'm a racist. But I'm not British. I'm not British. My race is Ashkenazi Jew. The British were mean to Ashkenazi Jews for 2,000 years. But boy, oh boy, they sure wrote well. Buried in this article, one paragraph, buried in this article. In my department, the author is very much alive, says Robert Fagan, a Robert Foss scholar and a longtime literature professor at Claremont McKenna, which is a more conservative college. And he said, we are very concerned with the beauty of things, with aesthetics, and ultimately with judgment about the value of works of art. I think there is a hunger among students for the thrill that comes from truth and beauty. And of course, their enrollment is up. Their enrollment is doing just fine. When I went to Hillsdale, one of the students told me there that when the teacher, it was actually Larry Arnn, I believe, the president of Hillsdale, made a speech about truth and beauty, about bringing, living with truth and beauty. And she started to cry because she had never heard that concept before. When you say these kids are oriented to the present, it's you. They did this to these kids. The kids don't just grow up like that. Kids don't want to hear about the past until you teach them, until you make it interesting and exciting and tell them that they're getting something. You know, Maya Angelou, terrible poet, but one of the poets who's always overpraised because she's black, right? And she said, she had this wonderful line where she said, Shakespeare must be a black girl. She read Shakespeare and she said, Shakespeare must be a black girl. Why did she say that? Because Shakespeare spoke to her. She said, the poetry you read has been written for you. Black, white, Hispanic, man, woman, gay, straight. It has been written for you, and that is the whole point. Literature, art, is like salvation. It doesn't come to the world, it comes to you. It is about you. The present knows nothing about itself. We know nothing about ourselves in the present, but the past knows a lot because it's already gone. And when learning how great minds, great talents saw the past, you learn about other people. You get other people inside you. You know, I talk a lot on the show about what I call the great speculation, which is the basis of the golden rule. The golden rule is do unto others as you would have them do unto you, but that is based on the speculation, unprovable, the speculation that your inner life is as important to you as my inner life is to me, and both are equally important before God. That is the great speculation. It's a two-part speculation. It can't be proved, but there it is. You learn this by loving. You learn it in marriage. You learn it by having children, and you learn it through art, because art is communing with another soul. And if you can't hear the artist because some idiot theorist is telling you about feminism and queers and race and gender in a way that the artist wasn't talking about it, if you don't let the artist speak, you aren't going to hear anything. If you don't think this is true, look at the arts now, look at TV now, look at the movies now. Nobody goes, nobody cares, nobody wants to see it. Why? Because the left is in control of the culture, and the culture has turned to crap, and the left can't figure it out. What went wrong? Where are all the English majors? How could this have happened? It's the same thing over and over and over again. It is them. When will they wake up? Never. We have to wake up for them. We have to do it ourselves. For more great content, like and subscribe to The Andrew Klavan Show wherever you get your podcasts.